Oh, no, we got some new faces. So if we haven't met, my name is Gray, and I'm the campus pastor here. And so this is week 3 of 4 weeks in Job. Many of you have been here for each of the weeks, so it's good that last week didn't scare you off because we went deep into some of the academic understandings of Job 1:6 through 2:10. So if you missed any of the previous sessions, they are on YouTube. So don't go to the main Forest Hill Church YouTube page. Go to the Forest Hill Fort Mill YouTube page, and we'll follow up with emails. As long as we have your email address, if you registered on your way in or online, we will email back after the fact and get you the links to all those. So what we've been doing in this study, a refresher for those who've been here, and then just informative for those who are new. We are doing kind of an inductive Bible study. So what that means is we are going to take the text and we're going to first just read it. And then we're going to make some observations, which is just kind of asking, what are the important words, ideas, people, characters, themes here? Just make some observations. We're going to circle them, underline them, that sort of thing. And then we're going to move into interpreting. And so the reading and observing is what you're doing at the tables. I'm giving you the opportunity to do that. And tonight will be a little bit different, but I'll talk about that in a second. Because the idea is I want to make sure everyone in the room is getting the scriptures in front of your faces and being able to kind of read it and process it a little bit. And after you make those observations, then that's when I bring it back up here to do the interpret part. Interpreting is asking, what does the text mean? Like, we made our observations or drawing out, like, here are some key words, key things. Now, what does it mean? What's actually being said here? And then after we talk about what it means, like, what did God actually write this to say to the original audience? Then we move into application. And application is where we say, what does the text now mean for me? What does this mean for my life, practically speaking? And so the application you will do around your tables with some questions. And so that's the format. Now tonight, if you've been here the last 2 weeks, you know tonight's a big night because we are covering Job essentially chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, all the way to Job 37. So we have a huge amount of material. So obviously there is no way we're going to be doing a close study and reading of that whole section. So what I did in your notes, and hopefully everybody has notes packets. Is there anyone who does not have a notes packet? Needs to grab one? You don't? So we need one. Darren, could we grab one? Anyone else need one before we get started? Okay. So in your notes packet, if you want to turn over to session 3, you will see we have 2 selected texts that I'm going to give you, and this is you're going to have a much shorter time tonight reading that and observing, because then we're going to zoom out. And so the teaching part tonight is going to be much more, I want to give you some framework, some cues to help you understand how to read that section. And I'm really just going to lean in to you guys to say, because we're doing a 4-week series, I hope that you will be reading this on your own and that this will give you some interpretive keys that help you understand what you're reading and make sense of the book. And then next week, we will hit Job 38 through the end of the book, Job 42. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and... It helps if I turn this on, I think. There we go. Summarizing where we're at today. Job 1 and 2. We might easily say there was a man in 3 days. Job 1:1 starts out by saying there was a man, and we're introduced to who Job was. And then we quickly move into a set of 3 different scenes. A scene that starts in Job 1:6 that says, now there was a day. So we move from there was a man to there was a day. And on that day, we're in the heavenlies, and we see this conversation taking place between God and his divine counsel, and there is apparently an intruder there called Satan, or the accuser, the challenger, better known as Satan. And we talked last week about who that person was, because there's some good conversation about that. And we see that Satan essentially accuses Job of being righteous only because of the good things God's going to bless him with when he's righteous. And at the same time, Satan is accusing God of having bad policies for ruling the world. He's essentially saying, when you bless the righteous, you're just creating religious mercenaries, people who follow you because of the blessings you give them. And so Satan's making a double accusation. It's an accusation of God, but it's also an accusation that's centered around Job. And so God grants Satan's request to attack Job. And so we move from the heavenly places to chapter 1:13, where it says, now there was a day. So there was a man, now there was a day, now there's another day. And on this day, apparently some time has passed, and Satan has done his work orchestrating all of these events and all of the catastrophes that come onto Job's life all at the same time, one after the other. And he loses all of his blessings, and he loses his children. In chapter 2, verse 1, we switch scenes again. Again, there was a day. This is another day where we're transported back from earth into the heavenly places, and we get the scene between Satan and God again. Very similar, almost exact wording from the first scene, except we see that Satan is ticked off. Because he was proven to be wrong, because Job did not sin, even though he removed all of the blessings that God had given. And Satan digs his heels in on his accusation and says, yeah, that's fine. But really, as long as someone has their life and their health, they're still going to be happy and they're still going to follow you. And God says, all right, try me. He's in your hands. Just don't take his life. But anything you want to do to him, go for it. And what's interesting is at that point, we don't shift to another day. Satan immediately leaves the presence of God and inflicts Job with sores, loathsome sores, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Probably hand, foot, and mouth, we decided last week. We have no idea. But we pick up from this moment a man in 3 days. 3 days that just completely wreck him. And he's left essentially sitting on the town's ash heap, like a landfill, just scraping himself with pieces of pottery. Some people, they don't know if that's because it was just itching that bad and hurting that bad, or if it was some kind of ritual sign of just lament. But Job is in a bad place, and we pick up in the story in chapter 2, verse 11 tonight. And that's where I want you to start your reading in your packet. Short verses that's going to introduce you to Job's friends, because the whole rest of the book shifts from narrative to poetry. And we'll talk about the way that we can understand that. And then the next passage I have is from the last chapter of the book, and it's where God gives a judgment on the friends and what they share with Job. And so I just want you to have some perspective as you read and as we talk about how God actually views Job's friends. Back and try to save us. We're in bad shape. Darren doesn't know what to do with the production either. So we'll just try to figure it out. Let's move in from reading, observing, and let's talk about interpreting a little bit. And I'd love to hear and just give you the opportunity to kind of shout out, even just from those passages, what are some things that stand out to you? What are some of the things you observe from those passages? It would have been better if the friends would have stayed quiet. Yeah. I'm sure Job felt that way. Yeah. What do you think about that? Right. Yeah. She said sometimes it's better just to listen and instead of trying to give words that may or may not comfort someone. Yeah. They did not recognize him. Yeah, his hand, foot, and mouth was so bad they didn't recognize him. No, literally, yeah, it's because apparently he was so deformed because of his skin and whatever this disease was. He wasn't even recognizable. Later throughout the book, you can kind of chart different places where he mentions like the pain that he's in, agonizing pain all the time. Apparently, there's like these sores that were filled with pus and would break, and his hair was falling out. There's all sorts of things you can kind of just trace, like little sentences along the way where he mentions what's happening, and so yeah, he's unrecognizable to friends. Mm. So three friends and 7 nights. So definitely you're noticing something intentional. There are. Mm-hmm. Yep. So there's definitely intentionality of like these numbers represent completion. So there was a complete number of friends or counselors, and there was a complete amount of time where they were sitting with Job in his grief, whatever that might end up meaning. Sure. For you, Audrey, anything. I think so. The question is, why would God at the end have Job pray for his friends? And I think what we'll find when next week when we go deeper into that chapter is God vindicates Job as being the only one who actually was righteous. And if you think about James 5, the prayer of a righteous man is powerful. And so by having Job pray for the friends, it is God showing in the end Job truly was righteous. Now we will clearly see, like if you read through these chapters and listen to what Job says, he is by no means perfect. And God is going to call him on his lack of perfection. But his integrity in his suffering, in the sense that he truly was blameless. He did not deserve suffering on the basis of anything he had done. God is proving he was righteous, essentially. Like what does that mean? Yeah. So pointing to when Job shaves his head, tears his robe, that was a traditional way of showing lament. It was a ritual that they had, so to speak, of what you did in your grief at that time, when it was at a significant amount. Is it surrender? I think you could describe it as that, because I think that would have been one of their ritualistic ways of showing in their grief that they were still going to abide by kind of the processes and rituals and forms that they had for relating to God. So it was a way of them showing that in their grief they're still going to surrender and submit to God. Yeah, I think that's right. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. She said the sprinkling of the dust, or like the ash, was also a part of that ritual. So one of the things I noticed that Audrey brought out is that the friends come and they sit in silence for a whole week. And initially I thought, man, these are bad friends. These, like, they're coming all this way. Apparently, they're all from different countries. So Job is an international man of wealth and mystery, I guess. And he has friends from all these 3 countries who clearly coordinated somehow to come at the very same time to comfort him. But they come and they just sit there for 7 days. And initially I thought, what kind of friends are these? And then as I kind of studied this and read in, what's actually being demonstrated in this passage is that these are three well-intentioned friends. And in that culture, there would have been a covenant of friendship. Again, another kind of ritual of formalizing a friendship to care for one another through thick and thin. And so they are actually acting in good intentions to come and to console and comfort their friend Job. And I think, to Audrey's point that she made in bringing this up, if you've ever been in a time of suffering, you know sometimes you just need someone to sit with you. One of the things I learned pretty early on doing pastoral care visits and things like that, I always feel you can't hear me, can you? Oh, you can hear me now. Okay. All right. We're going to be playing with this all night probably. Yeah, will you grab me a handheld? Technical difficulties. All right, while he's getting that, this is working, so I'm just not going to move. But going on pastoral care visits, I'd be like, I would be so afraid. Like, I wanted to get the right words. Like, I wanted to say, like, going to visit someone in the hospital or someone preparing for a funeral, the death of a loved one. I wanted to really just be able to say the right things that's really going to just comfort people and make them feel great. And finally, I realized through some mentors and then just experience, like, sometimes the best thing is just showing up and just sitting there and offering a prayer and being on the other end of sometimes hard things in life. You don't always need someone giving you advice. And yet at the same time, there is a moment, and this is the tension, where if you are truly a good friend, you have to at some point say something. And what you say then really matters. And that's where we kind of come in to see this dialogue that takes place in Job 3 through 37. So Job 3 starts off with Job's first words recorded after the final act where he's stricken with the boils and everything else. He has an interaction with his wife where his wife actually, interestingly, fulfills the role of the accuser. She mimics the exact words that Satan was trying to get Job to say, to curse God and die. And he rebukes her. And then he has friends show up, and then we finally, after a week, see Job's speech. And after Job's speech, the friends start to talk. And so tonight what I want to do is stay kind of high level. I want to help you understand some of the structure. I'll give you, I actually have it on the slide. I want you to understand the structure of how this is put together. Okay, we talked about in week 1, Job is a literary masterpiece. It is very intentionally put together. And that's not to make a decision on whether it's historical or whether it's a parable, another conversation we've been having for 2 weeks. Regardless of whether it's actual concrete literal history or a parable kind of in the way Jesus would tell parables, whoever wrote this story, inspired by the Holy Spirit, was a genius. And they put it together with such intentionality to try to communicate some certain things. So I want to help you understand the structure and then also understand the friends and what they represent and what they say and the way that works out. And then we'll kind of end looking at Job's responses and where that leaves us hanging for next week. Before we jump in, though, there is a great group called the Bible Project. Anybody ever heard of the Bible Project before? Many of you have. They have tons of free videos on YouTube where they will give you introductions of books of the Bible. And so what I wanted to do is between tonight and next week, give you, they're kind of 5 or 6 minute long videos. I want to give you the first half of the book of Job as told by the Bible Project. And so let's watch this video together and then we'll jump in, just because I think they do such a great job telling the story. So, helpful, right? Very clear way of understanding the book. We'll follow the rest of it next week. But that gives a great summary into what we're covering tonight. these friends and the structure in which these conversations take place, and the ultimate theological meanings that we need to draw from it. All right, so some of this will be kind of recapping, going a little bit deeper, and then we'll land the plane with some application discussion questions at your tables. So, understanding the structure. All right, so just like he talked about, there are 3 cycles of dialogue. So a cycle would start with, there's 6 speeches in each one. It's a friend will talk, Job will respond to them. The next friend will talk, Job will respond to them. The last friend will talk, Job will respond to them. All right, and there's 3 cycles of these. And so in the first cycle, you see, and I can't read, there's a monitor back there, but it's really small, so I can't see it. So the first cycle, the friends will state their positions, and they'll kind of give an indication of the wisdom that they're going to bring to Job. In the second cycle, the friends will discuss the fate of the wicked. So now they're moving away from being friends who are there comforting Job, and they're starting to separate themselves to start talking more abstractly about what happens to people who are wicked. And finally, by cycle 3, they've so separated themselves from being the friends there to provide comfort that they actually begin accusing Job directly. And so that's the way that the structure works. And the intention is that as you go through and read these different interactions that are taking place, one, as the video showed, you see Job on this emotional roller coaster. Like sometimes he says some things and you're like, wow, what a righteous guy. He is righteous. And then at some other points, it's like, Job, I feel like you crossed the line there, buddy. Like, I would be a little nervous if I were you. And he goes back and forth, and we'll see next week what God actually says about that to him. But the whole emphasis and the reason for the structure is that by the time you get to the end of chapter 37, you almost begin to feel some of the desperation that Job was feeling. You see through each cycle this heightening and separation that Job must have felt from his friends as they move from comforting to accusing him. And so he's left with only one resort, and that's to call on God. And Job is going to repeatedly call on God to basically try his case. Hey, God, I know I'm blameless. I wish someone would come take my case up and prove it. God, are you listening? Are you even there? Are you around? And that's when Job 38 starts with God speaking out of a whirlwind and coming to him. So that's kind of the structure of it, to make sense of why it operates the way it does. So now let's talk about the friends. So understanding the friends. So there's 3 main friends that we meet that are the bulk of the book, and that is Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. I'm probably not saying any of those correctly, but I tried. There's really no interpretive reasons why, like these names don't necessarily mean anything significant. The places that they're coming from don't necessarily mean anything significant, at least that we can uncover. We don't even know where a couple of these places are. We take some guesses based on some other ancient Near Eastern literature. But each of these people kind of represent a slightly nuanced idea of what's called the retribution principle. All right, so the retribution principle is very simply, the righteous will prosper and the wicked will suffer. That was the default position of ancient Near Eastern wisdom. The way the world operated is, if you are good, good things happen to you. If you are bad, bad things happen to you. And so what we're going to see over and over and over again from these friends is some kind of assertion and belief around this principle. And really, one of the things that this book is trying to blow up is the idea that this principle remains true always and in every circumstance. Okay, so the way we've been talking about this as a main idea of the book is that the book of Job teaches us that God does not order and run the world on the basis of his justice. Right? So God is just. There is a general truth in the retribution principle that is absolutely true. We know in the end, God will bless the righteous and he will judge the wicked, and they will suffer. We know in the end, God is a just judge, and God cannot look on evil and call it good. And he's never going to look on good and call it evil. That is true as a general statement. But we all also know from life that it doesn't always get meted out that way in the day-to-day, does it? Because I know a lot of really good people who suffer a lot of horrible things. And I know a lot of people that I would not qualify as good who seem to get blessing after blessing. So God does not order and run the world on the basis of his strict justice. He runs the world on the basis of his wisdom, which does not tell us the reasons why he allows bad things to happen to good people and righteous people, but it does give you a place to look when bad things happen. That's what Job is all about. That's what these dialogues are all about. And so there's essentially there's a triangle of three commitments, three beliefs that we see. You have this in your notes, I think. Yeah. I forget what page it is, but it should be somewhere around there. 14, page 14, perfect. So these are three truths that are kind of being argued around this book. So one of them is the retribution principle that I was just talking about. That's strict view of justice. The other is God's justice. Is God truly just? For God not to be just, that would be to say God actually looks on evil things and calls them good sometimes. So we can't trust his character. We can't trust God as a just God. But one of the huge assertions in this book is no, God is just. And then the other one is Job's righteousness. These are the three assertions being made. Now here's the key. You can have two of these, but not all three. So you can't say God is just and Job was really blameless. He was really righteous. And also the retribution principle is true. Because clearly, Job, if he is righteous and if God is just, then the retribution principle can't be true in this instance. The friends will say the retribution principle is absolutely true and God is absolutely just. And so the third truth that they're going to say must be a lie is that Job must not really be righteous. Do you see how this works? You can have two of these truths, but you can't have three. And so there's variations of this that are going on. So Job's response, essentially, is going to be a fluctuation between believing I'm just, like I'm righteous, and I know that. But he's moving in between whether or not God is just. And he's calling it into question, and he's calling the retribution principle into question as well. And he kind of goes back and forth. But never do we really see Job question whether or not he is righteous. We do see him go through several long dialogues where he says, if I have sinned, it's just like 14 verses, all starting with if, in different variations of the same question. If I have sinned, I can't see it. Someone please show it to me. But he never goes to the point of saying, maybe I really am sinful. Maybe I'm not righteous. Job's question ultimately is going to be, is God just? Can I really trust that God's not the one causing all of this suffering? I would imagine some of us have had those questions before too. Yeah. Yeah, great question. So he said, since everyone is ultimately sinful, is Job not getting into a little bit of self-righteousness or pride in the way that he's responding? The answer is yes, he is getting self-righteous in the way that he responds. And that ultimately is what that final friend, Elihu, comes and accuses him of. He will come and accuse Job of being self-righteous by how firmly he was holding on to how righteous he was in the midst of everything. And so the whole point of Elihu coming in is he's a little bit different from the friend, like the video said, the other friends. He's going to still come in and say, God is just, and Job may not have sinned. He might have been blameless when all this started. But the nuance in Elihu's argument is, but sometimes maybe God has reasons for allowing suffering, which surface sin that's there and kind of settled at the bottom. Remember week 1 I said, sometimes if you went to the mountains and got a clear vial or glass, and you got water from a clear mountain stream, and you sat it down, let it sit for a few minutes, you would be able to look at it, and it would look like perfectly crystal clear, right? But if you shook it around a little bit, you would recognize it would get cloudy pretty quickly, because there would be, even though it looks clear when it's sitting there, when it gets shaken up, there's actually some sediment that's settled down at the bottom. Job is essentially this blameless, he's a man of integrity and character, but when the storm comes and it shakes him up, it does reveal and push to the surface some of this self-righteousness that actually is there. And so Elihu's argument is that maybe God's whole reason for allowing this is to show that you had some junk down hidden deep, and this is his way of taking care of that before it can really come out in worse ways. So God's going to come in the end and basically say, Elihu got close, but still off. And so in the end we see Job he's not perfect. He's not perfect. So this retribution principle is really at the center of this book. It is the center of ancient conventional wisdom. One of the questions I want you to discuss here in a minute, in the application part, is in what ways the retribution principle might be alive and well today. Now, you don't have to call it that, but what are some of the natural ways of thinking that we have around suffering and about why suffering happens? The ancients had this retribution principle, which was, if you're good, you get blessed. If you're bad, you get suffering. I think that's still alive and well in some ways today. I think we might call it karma, or what goes around comes around, or right? There might be some other ways we think about that. So just be holding on to that as we think about, this is not just an ancient idea. It's something that we feel and are affected by as well. And so as we walk through, all I want to do for a minute is I want to walk through a little bit of what these cycles of conversation look like. And then leave you with a chance, if you want to ask any questions, go for it. Feel free to interrupt at any point. And then we'll do some application. All right, so the first cycle starts with Eliphaz talking to Job. So basically, Eliphaz's first thing that he wants to communicate to Job in his speech is, you need to appeal to God and admit your offense. Hey, you are, no human being is righteous before God. You're clearly a sinner. Just admit it. Job's response to Eliphaz is basically, stop treating me as guilty. Rather than appeal to God with false humility and trumped up offenses, I will confront him with demands for vindication. That's where it's kind of like, okay, Job, you're going a little crazy here. Cycle 2 with Eliphaz. Eliphaz, remember, it's going to get more intense, and they're going to separate themselves a little bit more from Job. Eliphaz turns and says, recognize your guilt by comparing how God treats the wicked to how he was treating you. You have nullified your own piety, is basically what he's saying. So Job's response to that is, I need protection from God's attacks, and I need an advocate to take up my case. Basically, God's causing this. I need someone to come up and try my case here. In the third cycle, it moves straight to accusation, where Eliphaz says, repent, be restored, and go on. Like, be done with it. Job's response then is, look around you. Who can think about self when the world is so out of sync? Now he moves from looking at his own life and his own suffering to looking out at the brokenness of the world. And he's basically trying to throw this whole idea of the retribution principle out of the books. Bildad, in cycle 1, says that Job essentially needs to take this retribution principle seriously and recognize the inevitable conclusion, right? Two parts of the triangle. The retribution principle is true. God's justice is true. Job, clearly, logically, you are not righteous. Job essentially responds by saying, I know the traditions are true, but I am not ready to admit that the conclusions are inevitable. But he admits he doesn't really have any options. So in cycle 2, Bildad comes back and says, give up the pretense, the wicked are doomed, and you are among those who do not know God. Job responds to that and says, it is God that has messed up my life, not me. A defender will arise and vindicate me from your insinuations. In the final cycle, Bildad will say, face the fact that tradition knows best. Job will respond, God's immense power has brought order to the cosmos, but not to my life. I am God's victim, and you will be too. Here I stand with only my righteousness to cling to. You see how Job's digging in at the end? Zophar, in the first cycle, will then come. He'll say, devote your heart to God and put away sin. Job will say, you're misrepresenting me and God. And basically says, I hope I can get my hearing and restore my relationship with God before I die. In cycle 2, Zophar comes back and says, your sin is pride, and God has judged you as wicked. And Job basically says, the system and God's policies for running the world are really what's broken. And then we don't get a response after that from Zophar and nothing from Job. Elihu enters into the picture and says, we made it so far. Maybe this isn't about sin that you've already committed, but no, maybe. There it is. It's a good microphone down there. Should I just yell? Oh, okay. I'm not going to move. All right. I'm going to stay very still. And Elihu, let's be honest, we've already talked about Elihu, so we'll move on. All right. Oh, there we go. More stable. Job's responses, as we've discussed, move along a spectrum of belief in God's justice, a belief that God will vindicate him, to a belief that he's alone with his righteousness. It's just him and his goodness, and the rest of the world is just in chaos. It ends in his final appeal in chapter 37, with him finally just saying, God, if you're there, I need you to hear me out and explain to me what's happening here. We'll see the way that God comes in next week. But I want to give you a couple of summary points and then let you discuss. So the first thing is this. Job's suffering, we see, although his friends came with good intentions, that's all the indications of how it's put together culturally seem to say they came with good intentions, but Job's suffering is actually compounded by the ignorance and insistence of his friends that he deserved everything which had happened to him. So his friends who meant to be comforters actually came and added to his suffering. Secondly, the perspectives of Job's friends are demonstrated to be common but false and ultimately harmful to those who suffer. Again, as we move to application, I want you to be kind of thinking, what are some ways you think about suffering that maybe are common? What are some cultural ways that maybe we think about good things, bad things, blessings, tribulations that need to be challenged by the book of Job? Third, Job continues to attest to his innocence all the way through, questioning God's justice and goodness, and desperately requesting an audience with God to air his grievances. And finally, the reasons for Job's suffering remain unknown, although we know what the reason is not. Job does not suffer because he has sinned, because we know from all of the points that the author intentionally made throughout the first part of the book, that Job really is innocent. At least
his suffering is not the result of his sin. Those are the truths we walk away with. And we're left hanging with this question that Job is trying to figure out. Why did this happen? And so God's not exactly going to answer that question. But the way he does come and speak to Job, which we'll cover next week, is going to be highly instructive for us as we consider our own suffering and the experiences of that and the brokenness of this world that we walk through. And so that's some interpretation through Job 3 through 37. Read it on your own, but during this next little part, you've got more time than we've had the last couple of weeks. 3 questions to kind of consider in application. And so use the rest of this time around your tables to discuss, and I will come back up in about 20 minutes and close us out. Yes. I did say I was going to give you a chance for a question, so. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Audrey noted that Job in Job 3, his first real kind of lament, he doesn't curse God, but he curses the day that he was born. And he's in a really depressive state. And is that not a sign of unrighteousness? I'm not sure that it is a sign necessarily of unrighteousness. And the reason is because we see lament throughout the Old Testament. And because the way we see God respond to Job and Job's statements in chapter 42 seem to indicate that while Job did cross the line in some places, God's overarching message is Job has spoken rightly. And so there is some sense in which Job's lament, the emotional rawness, is allowed and invited by God. And I think if you read the book of Lamentations or some of the prophets or like 3/4 of the Psalms, you would see lament in this kind of like raw crying out to God. There's some language there that we in 21st century America aren't very good at understanding or dealing with. We just don't really think of the world that way or talk that way. We're not very upfront with our emotions in that way. And actually our sermon this Sunday, come back to church this Sunday, Jonathan Scott is talking about lament. So can you see why we did this teaching series at the same time? Yeah. Any other questions before I turn it back over to you guys? I didn't give you a chance. No? Perfect. All right. Y'all discuss and well, hopefully you had some good discussion. Good discussion? Yes? Okay. Everybody's still discussing. That's a good sign, I think. All right? You know, we started this session, and I summarized Job as the first section, at least, as there was a man and there were 3 days. And as we get through to chapter 37, we see Job left in the midst of his suffering, essentially believing that God had abandoned him, that he was just left, he was forsaken, and he is waiting for a chance to be vindicated. I think one of the most helpful things I've learned over the years about how to read the Bible is ultimately to recognize that the whole Bible is about Jesus. And we'd be remiss to move beyond this section and not see how Jesus is ultimately the true and better Job. because Jesus was another man whose story might be described. There was a man in 3 days. Jesus was the truly righteous sufferer who took on excruciating pain and accusation and suffering, even though he didn't deserve it. And even to the point of crying out himself, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then there was a day where he died, and for 3 days he was dead. But we know the story doesn't end there, because God took the sufferings of Jesus, and as bad as it was, redeemed it and turned it into something where now we look at a cross not as an instrument of torture, but as a means of celebrating, a means of salvation, a means for there being life. What we'll see with Job is that even in the midst of his questioning in his own way, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? There is hope for Job. But Job's got to learn some lessons before that hope comes. So that's what we'll see next week, chapter 38 through 42. Yes, ma'am. Yeah? It's a great connection. Job was asking for an advocate, and we have one. So my hope for you is that you walk away maybe knowing a little bit more about Job. Maybe this shifts some perspective as we go along for how God operates the world and how we can think when pain and suffering enters into our lives, and that ultimately through it all, it'll force you even more in a beautiful way to submit to God's wisdom and to trust in Jesus, who is your advocate. So let me pray for us, and we'll wrap up. Jesus, we thank you that your work in salvation is not, it's not just one and done, and now you're sitting in the heavens doing nothing. But you continue to work for us. Salvation has been secured through the cross, but you continue, as the book of Hebrews tells us, to intercede and advocate on our behalf. You are the constant voice, whisper in the ear of the Father, who joyfully receives your words, saying, they are covered by my blood. They are righteous. They are saints, not sinners. We know that because of our union with you, you're not distant and apart from us when we suffer, but you are actually with us. You suffered for us, but you also suffer with us. And those are hard truths to wrap our minds around, but when we do and we catch glimpses of what that actually means, they provide so much comfort. So I pray that you would lead us to understand your word rightly, to apply it rightly, to be the kinds of friends to those who are suffering that you would have us be, to have the right kind of perspective that trusts your wisdom even when we don't understand your ways. So keep us all safe as we leave this place tonight. We love you. We thank you for your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right. So next week, week 4, and we'll close this 4-week study on the book of Job. So appreciate you guys. See you next week.